want to talk about tonight is we're going to go through some supply and demand stuff, and then we're going to get into kind of understanding how markets work and how firms and industries interact with each other from an economic standpoint, right? And so there's going to be what I would consider just normal economics type content, but there's going to be a little bit of stuff that you would really only get in a business school type curriculum as well. And so we'll try to have fun with that. So this will be, this is kind of an interesting example here, and I guess you guys can't really see that very well, can you? I got one yes and one no. You can't?
It's fine.
It's fine? Okay. Okay, well, let's see. I'll try to figure out how to hook the thing up after the break, or during the break. Okay, so the notes kind of start off with a discussion of something that predates probably most of you remembering anything about life on planet Earth, I'm guessing. And definitely, I kind of remember this stuff because I was 14 in the year 2000, at the end of the year 2000. So, you know, but, you know, I had a VCR back then, or my family did, right? Y'all had VCRs back in the day, right? And do you remember what the big deal was with the year 2000? Because both of you are like, what, 5, 6 years old? Like that? Some of you are older than me. But what? Do, and you know, after all the numbers reset, right? Like it was 98, 99, and then what's it going to do, right? And there's all these like theories about how everything's going to blow up or whatever. Stuff's just going to, everything's going to shut down, right? Right? And well, I don't know if you ever saw it, but you remember seeing a check back then? And they would always put like, they would, you know, on the date at the top, right? They would put 19 and then a little space, right? For you to write the year. You didn't know this? Okay, some of you did. Yeah, so then they, right around that time, you know, they stopped putting the 19 there, thankfully, stopped putting that on the check so that, you know, we just have a line there for the whole date now. So I remember that. Now I'm like, well, why can't you just put a 20 now? Because we've got like, what, 1,000 years before we're going to need to maybe get a 21. So why are they afraid to, you know, flip it? We barely use them now, right? So anyway, there were all kinds of things that people were worried about. And one of the things people were worried about was like power outages, right? Because of course, if your VCR is going to go out, right? Because I remember, you know, always seeing the date and it was like, oh, what's the VCR going to say, you know, on New Year's tomorrow? But not nearly as big of a deal as, you know, power plants or something like that, and not being able to figure out what's going on, I guess. I don't know. And so people thought, you know what? We need some generators, right? Because if the power grid goes down, I got to plug my house into something, or my refrigerator at least, right? And so, so from 1990 to 1998, sales of these portable generators, right, that you could plug an appliance in for a period of time, right, fuel, diesel fuel or something like that, they grew 2% yearly, right? So every year, you know, just kind of with the population growth or something, right? Population grows 2%, you know, people just buying generators because everybody wants one, right? Or maybe most people want one. So then all of a sudden, it's like, uh-oh, what if the power never comes back on? I gotta have a generator on New Year's Day, right? So, the companies that make these things, they start changing the way their industry is structured, right? They start kind of like buying up either the companies that sell their products or buying up the companies that supply them, right? That's vertical integration, right? And they start just kind of, you know, maybe making their businesses bigger, right? Investing in more and bigger factories and stuff like this, right? Trying to take advantage of economies of scale, just cranking out these generators, right? So when they do that, we get to this point where in 1999, industry shipments increased by 87% and prices go up 21%. Whoa, that's insane, right? So they almost doubled the number of generators they sold in 1999 relative to the average over the past 10 years before that, right? That's unreal. Anybody have a generator? When I bought my house here in Ottawa late last year, there was a generator in the house when I was looking at it. And it was so big, it was mounted on a trailer. It was huge. And when I had somebody inspect the house, there's actually a plug that comes out of my box, my, what do they call it? Switch box thing, you know what I mean? Breaker, yeah. Circuit breaker box. There's actually a cord that comes out that plugged into that thing. It's like one of those big dryer plugs. So I can plug my house into something, the whole thing. So the guy who did that was an engineer that got him on my house. So there's all these weird engineering things all over the place. Kind of neat. But the guy told me it wasn't up to code. So I'm a little nervous to actually plug the house in or even go near that and like touch it. It's a little scary. So how do we make sense out of something like this? How do we make sense out of, we can kind of make just intuitive sense out of like, well, people are going to want more of something. So if I'm in the business of selling that something, I got to figure out how to deal with it, right? But understanding this part, the increase in 87% and simultaneously an average increase of 21% in the price, that's sort of like, how does that work, right? How do we make sense out of that? And the other prediction you might want to make is what happens next? So what happens in the year 2000 after, in 1999, everybody bought? Yeah, you think people are going to buy less, probably, right? So, let's see. Oh, sorry, I can't figure out this thing. Okay, here we go. So when we think about industries and markets and trying to understand supply and demand, and you guys have gone through some supply and demand stuff before, right? Before now. So whenever we're making these nice little graphs that tell us something about what's going on, there's a lot of information behind those graphs that we're assuming, right? So there's a time, a product, and some kind of location type dimension to it, right? Like you could draw a supply and demand graph for I don't know, all the pins on the entire planet, right? But it would sort of be hard to make sense out of that, right? It's a lot better if you could sort of shrink down the geography, right? Or shorten up the time frame, right? And what about fancy Ottawa University pins versus some cheap pen, right? Maybe those are different enough that we can't put them on the same supply and demand graphs, right? Or maybe people change the way they produce these pens, so that changes something, right? And so we need to think about changes in terms of how these, what's behind these supply and demand graphs. So here, so we're talking about these portable generators. We're talking about an annual time frame, right? So every year we had 2% growth, right? And then that last year we had 87% growth. And next year we're trying to figure out how many we're going to sell, right? So we're thinking in terms of annual, right? Then we're talking about portable generators, and we're just assuming that, if it's a generator and it's portable, that they're all sort of basically the same thing. Okay? Now, the one that was in my garage was technically portable, but you had to have like a 3/4 ton truck to pull it. So maybe not so portable, right? You can't just pick it up with your hand and walk around with it, right? And in geography terms, we're just talking about the U.S. really, right? Maybe people in Italy weren't worried about their VCRs. I don't know. No idea. So what we want to talk about is shifts in the demand curve. So when there are changes in the market that we can diagram not by moving along the demand curve, but actually by shifting the demand curve itself. Right? So if we move along the demand curve, right, we know that the quantity demanded has increased, right? So let me see, I can probably draw here, right? Yeah. And Nicola has these fancy markers. Sound like I'm a Boise fan or something here. Y'all can see that, can't you? Yeah. So tell me if I'm doing this right, right? Quantity, what goes up here? Can you see that, Jacob?
Yes.
Okay. And so then if I've got, you know, a demand curve like this, right? It's supposed to go that way, isn't it? No? If the price goes up, you don't buy less of something? Right, but you might be thinking about time frame, right? Sure, but within a specific time frame, right? If the price of pens goes up, you're not going to go out and buy 20 times as many as you normally would, right? Yeah. So this is the right shape for a demand curve. So moving along this demand curve just shows that our quantity demanded is increasing, right? So if the price goes down, the demand curve basically, the essence of the demand curve says when the price falls, we increase the amount we buy, right? But the demand curve itself isn't changing in that instance, right? Right? In other words, our valuation of this good isn't changing. The amount I'll pay for for 5 units of that good hasn't changed, right? It's just that now the price is lower in the market, so I'm going to buy more. So, excuse me. There's different ways that we can actually have a shift in the demand curve. So we can go from a demand curve like this to one like this, right? So now, there's several ways to think about it, right? But at every price here, we're willing to buy a larger quantity, right? Does that make sense? Because if I draw, I'm just going to use all these markers. Have a little fun. Right? If D2 now is changing, if that represents the change in the way I value this good, well, if the price stays the same, I'm going to buy more now, right? So what we want to talk about is not, changes in the price that affect the quantity we buy, but changes in the way people value the good itself, right? And that's going to affect the demand curve, right? It's going to have us shifting the demand curve, right? So, so uncontrollable factors, so things that are outside of a company's control. So changes in people's income, right? So if you, let's say your salary doubles, right? And last week you bought 2 boxes of mac and cheese, right? And then tomorrow I gave you a permanent raise, doubled your income. You gonna buy more or less mac and cheese? What do you think? Okay, so it depends, right? On
I probably cheese already less.
Well, I'm assuming you consume it every week, right? So now our time frame is weekly, right? Okay, better example. Let's say last year you bought steak twice, right? If I double your income, are you going to spend more money on steak?
Possibly.
Possibly, right? But the point is, so that an increase in your income for some products could be a shift in the demand curve this way, right? You change my income, you bet I'm going to change my demand curve for some things, right? And maybe for other things, I actually shifted it the other direction, right? There you go, ramen. I was using mac and cheese, but you know, cool. Okay. I didn't know if ramen was still a thing. I mean, you know, I have it at my house. My wife's cheap, so. So income could change this around, right? It's not going to change. We're not going to move along the demand curve, right? Because nothing changed with the price of the good, right? It's my income changed. Okay, what about the weather? Anybody have an umbrella? Why? It's just water. Just kidding. But if all of a sudden it's going to start raining a lot more, maybe you're more willing to buy one if you don't have one already, right? Okay. So that means your demand curve for that shifts. Interest rates. Oh boy. As a recent purchaser of a home who is considering refinancing, I can tell you that if rates go down, interest rates go down, what does that mean? Like, what's the first thing that means?
Cheaper to borrow money.
Cheaper to borrow money, right? And if it's cheaper to borrow money, let's say you're renting an apartment, right? Cheaper to borrow money, all of a sudden, you're going to think about maybe buying a house instead, right? So your demand curve might shift for things you borrow, right? Interest rates go down. Prices of substitute and complements owned by other companies, right? So again, we're talking about something that this one business doesn't control, right? And so maybe other products that compete with that business's product, right? So substitutes or complements, right? Things that go with it, right? So if, let's see, what can you think of something, oh, okay, well, let's go to pencils and pens, huh? So if, let's say we own our pencil factory, right? And the price of pens goes up, okay? So are pencils and pens substitutes or complements? Substitutes for the most part, right? Unless you're like into some kind of art thing where you use pens and pencils together, maybe, right? But in general, they're substitutes, right? So the price of pens goes way up, and we're producing pencils and selling them too, right? Okay. So is that a good thing for us if the price of pens goes up? Right. So the demand curve for our pencils would shift, right? And it would shift this way specifically, right? It would increase, right? Because the price of a substitute went up. Okay. What about, oh man, let's see. What if now we are a dairy? Yeah, selling milk. What goes good with milk? Cookies, that's right. My wife made snickerdoodles last night with my kids. Oh, so good. Amazing. So if the price of cookies falls and we're selling milk, does that help us or hurt us? Help, right? Because now everybody's got more cookies. So the demand curve for milk shifts to the right. Correct? Now, if the opposite happened, right? Now all of a sudden cookies are more expensive, then we're going to start here on this orange line and we're going to move to the blue line, right? Okay. So let's talk about some controllable factors. In other words, things that can be controlled by a company. So price, right? Price of our product, but you know, that's going to be more of a moving along curve, right? Advertising, what do you think? You think advertising could shift the demand curve? How? What do you think?
Or something, or like a new product.
Well, a sale would just be a lower price.
So you're bringing in new customers.
Right? Okay, so bringing in new customers. Okay, how's that going to happen?
If you bring in a bunch more people, they're going to be buying more, right? Then it increases your supply and demand.
Okay. All right, so, I think to talk about advertising being a little more specific to a demand shift, though, is not necessarily getting more people in the door, although that's sort of what happens as a result of what the advertising is supposed to do, right? The advertising itself is supposed to change the way people think about the product, right? It's supposed to convince people or get their attention or something, right? Even if they already know about pencils, right? Maybe they see an advertisement about our pencils and how great our pencils are, and maybe they'll come buy our pencils, not somebody else's, right? We got their attention. And so you can represent that by a shift in the demand curve, right? Or maybe they just have a really cringy ad campaign that you don't like, then maybe that would actually shift it the other way, right? We go from here to here, right? They have a really crappy ad campaign, right? Possible. Negative advertising. Is there such a thing as bad press? I don't know. You think so? Okay. Let's see. Warranties. So warranty, anybody know?
Warranty is like if something goes wrong with whatever you have, you're able to, the company is able to replace it at either little to no charge or what.
Okay. And usually, like if it's a defect with the product itself, not like you bought an iPhone and then you threw it across the roof, right?
So if like your iPhone decided it wanted to start, like the program or the processor started messing up internally, it's usually something that you have no control over.
Right, there you go. Yeah, so if it's something you didn't do, but the company itself just messed up and they were making that thing, then they'll replace it. Right, so if we increase our warranty, so I don't know, cars. Anybody bought a car lately? No? Anybody know anything about car warranties? Like the warranty on, I don't know, a Dodge or.
There's got tires and they have a.
Okay.
They have something.
Usually you're going to have a mileage warranty on tires, right?
It's like 25,000, but I don't know.
Okay. So yeah, okay, let's talk about tires. If you had one set of tires that had a 25,000 mile warranty and one set that had a 50,000 mile warranty, right? You might have a different demand curve for that one with the higher warranty, right? Or if one company, shifts their average tire warranty from 25 to 50,000, right? Then our demand for that product is going to increase, right? Product quality, I think that makes sense. Although we have to be careful, right? Because if we're going to say product quality changes, then we could be splitting a market, right? Like Jacob might be making pencils that are terrible, and I may be making great pencils, right? Now all of a sudden we can't put both of our pencils together in the same market, right? Because his pencils run out like that, and mine last 10 years, right? I can pick on Jacob because he works for me, so it's okay. Does Russ pick on him? Nicole pick on him? He does. Surely not.
It's easy to pull it.
Is that why you're sitting at the back? Because you're easy to pull it? Okay. Okay, distribution speed, right? If you get it there fast, maybe that's going to increase people's demand for it, right? It's like, I got to have it today, right? Service quality, and then we can obviously talk about prices or substitute or complementary products also owned by the company. So we talked about substitutes and complements in the case of something the company doesn't control. Can a company have substitutes for its own products? Yeah. It makes sense if they have complements, right? If you go to the grocery store and they have peanut butter and jelly, right? Makes sense. Or maybe your, I don't know, what the heck company makes peanut butter? I don't know. Smuckers. Were they the ones like in the 90s or whatever when they tried to make like both in one?
That's all I was trying to think of the name of that. Yeah.
Oh, I don't want to think too much about it.
Peanut butter and jelly in one jar.
Yeah. They do?
Yeah.
It's probably in the bottom shelf though.
Yeah. Salted in it.
Wow.
So like big things, pins and pencils.
Okay, there you go. Bic makes pens and pencils, right? So to an extent, those are, like we said, substitutes, right?
Venmo, Facebook and Instagram. Those are all
Yeah,
Especially.
But you could-
Those are definitely substitutes.
yeah, but you could also make an argument that those are like, well, those two, I think those are definitely substitutes, but Facebook and Instagram are almost like two different markets, right? Like Facebook is for like
But they're still in the
boomers.
social media sphere, like you can't just be like, I'm gonna log out of Facebook and go on Instagram. You know?
Yeah, but honestly, if you have both, do you use one more than the other?
Yes.
Yeah. You probably even have different social networks on both apps. You could, at least,
Yeah.
right? You have like all your school friends on Instagram, and then like you have your mom on Facebook. See, I remember when Facebook was like cool. It was a new thing. It came out what, 2006, I think? No, 2005. I was in college when it came out. I was a freshman in 2005. In the fall of 2005 at K-State. Go Cats. And like you were like 5, right?
That was pretty close.
I hate this. I feel so old. But would you want to compete against yourself? I mean, that kind of seems weird, right? Why would Facebook want to compete against itself with Instagram? Well, it only seems like that, right? Maybe to an extent they are, but maybe to an extent they really aren't. All right, but it is a concern for some companies, right? Like I can always make these ag examples because I used to be an ag econ professor, but well, like what about like labels on food, right? So if let's say I make beef, right? I package beef, right? And I change my production system and I start producing beef that's like, I don't know, grass-fed or something, right? And so I have my product, and I have one that doesn't have a label on it that's fancy, right? It has normal labels on it, but not a fancy one. And then this one over here says grass-fed on it, right? I might be creating a problem for myself, right? Because people who like grass-fed beef might just buy the grass-fed stuff and not buy my old stuff, right? And other people might get mad that I'm offering grass-fed beef and stop buying my other stuff, right?
But wouldn't you be opening yourself to two different markets?
Right, so you could make an argument there again that those are two separate markets. You're right. That's a good point.
Trying to think of an economist so
What?
so trying to think like an economist, it seems so hard.
Well, you know, it's a lot of hand waving. Everything else equal, then you make up whatever you want. It's great.
Senator Sparrows.
Yeah, Senator Ferris. Better than a meteorologist job. Okay, we can probably move on since we've been on this one slide for like 20 minutes. Okay, I do not understand this example. I tried, and I do not understand it, probably because, like, your age compared with VCRs is me to DOS.
What is that?
I think it's an operating system for IBM computers. Back when IBM made computers. Okay, I don't even remember this. Okay, so I have no idea what this example was supposed to tell us. I'm gonna skip it. Well, I don't know. Maybe I won't. I guess we can kind of talk about this a little bit. We can at least try to understand what they were trying to do. Okay, so yeah, in the late 1970s, so roughly 8 years before I was born, Microsoft developed some operating system for their computers. And let's see. Yeah, so the price of that operating system is dependent on what you could use it for, right? I mean, it doesn't make any sense now, right? Because pretty much any computer you have, you can do whatever you want with, right? For the most part, unless you have a Mac. And then Excel doesn't work when I'm trying to teach stuff in class.
But Google Sheets is just Excel.
Yeah, there you go, Google Sheets, there you go. So to increase demand for their operating system, which again makes no sense in the current context, they licensed their operating system to other computer manufacturers, right? So they're kind of betting on some kind of bandwagon effect, right? Where everybody starts buying up all this other stuff, all these other types of machines, And so then everybody's using their software, right? So now all of a sudden, they get to control what's going on, right? So they develop their own versions of complementary products, right? So if anybody ever used Microsoft Internet Explorer or ever seen it, right? So there you go, right? They came up with that program that only works on their operating system, right? And they keep the price of their operating system low, which again, makes no sense to anybody. That's fine, right? Because now we just buy new computers when the operating system is obsolete, right? You just buy new one. Anybody ever updated an operating system in a computer? A couple of you, yeah? Yeah, so I mean, I remember doing that, but making sure everything was compatible, right? Make sure it was upgraded in a, yeah. So it's possible. So, how did Microsoft control demand using these factors, and how did competitors operate differently? So, anybody know how Apple was different from IBM, Microsoft back in the day? No? Well, so one big difference between IBM and Apple, did somebody raise their hand online? Sorry, did I miss it? No. So one big difference between them was Apple focused on like workstation type computers, right? So like personal computers for people. Whereas IBM focused on, you know, the big thing in a room, right? And then you had a terminal in your office that accessed the one big main computer, right? And so that's why Apple was able to do a lot with kind of like through the 90s and the early aughts, like why they were doing really well with personal computers, because they had figured that out back in the 80s and were building that technology a lot more than their competitors were, right? And Microsoft just happened to sort of have, you know, pitched its wagon to IBM to an extent. So Microsoft is saying, look, everybody, all these other computer manufacturers use our operating system, right? And so that's going to give us control over most people's use of their computers, right? So they're going to have to buy our products to work with our operating system, right? But what about Apple? I mean, what was my complaint just a second ago, right? Excel doesn't work on Apple very well, right? In fact, people have like dual boot systems, right? Where the same computer, you can either boot it up with, you know, I don't know, what's the operating system called? Like Safari or something like that? Yeah, Mac OS. Wow. Oh, real inventive. Jeez. Or you can boot it up in, and I can't even think. Windows, I don't know. What are we on? 10? 10? Yeah, there you go.
That's not much more creative.
Yeah, but at least it changes.
I think technically Apple is like Linux or something, like go like different.
Oh yeah, so like Linux, the little penguin guy, is like another alternative. Yeah, right. Which, I mean, you know, I think you have to have a PhD in like software engineering to run those stupid things. But Apple just kind of did their own thing, right? They're like, well, look, we're just going to have our computers and our software, and we're just going to run our stuff. And if customers want our cool product, they're going to have to buy our stuff, right? They can't buy a compact. You're going to see a compact PC. I don't know if you're that old. Big goal.
Yeah,
You have. So, you know, Apple went sort of the product-oriented approach, right? And Microsoft went sort of the, you know, market dominance approach, right? And so in that case, right, Microsoft is maybe better able to take advantage of some of these demand shifters, right? Like complementary products and stuff like that, right? They're better able to, you know, if somebody makes an innovation in laptops, right? Then maybe chances are Microsoft's going to be in a position to take advantage of that, right? Because unless it was Apple, pretty much everybody else works with them, right? So they stand to take advantage of some of these complementarity changes. Let's see. So I've already talked about this demand shift, you know, from one to another, but I guess we can kind of dig in a little bit I guess these are just kind of like useful numbers, right? So if you look here, you know, if the price is $6 and we're on this demand curve, then we want what? 7, right? But over here we want 11, right? So it just kind of, whenever you see a demand shift, right, in your head you should be thinking like, okay, something about the product or the person's perception of the product changed, right? Whether it's the price of a complement or a substitute changed the way they value the product, right? Something about external circumstances, like the weather or something like that changed their valuation of the product, or something about the company itself, right? Advertising or something like that changed the way people are perceiving that product, right? But no matter what, whether we're going a leftward shift to the demand curve or a rightward shift, right? It's changing the way people value that product. So, law of supply. So do I have the supply curve going the right way? Everybody?
Yeah.
Okay. Because if the price goes up from 6 to 8, then I'm going to want to produce more, right? I'm going to go from 5 to 7, right? If the price is at 6, I only want to sell 5 or 3. Okay. If the price is at 6, I only want to sell 3. There we go. Can I math today? If the price is at 6, I only want to sell 3. But if the price goes up to 8, I want to sell 5. Right? So that makes sense, right? Law of supply. So everything else held equal, right? So we're talking about a specific time frame over a specific geographical area, right? And a single product, right? All that stuff is the same. Then this is gonna make sense, right? Okay. So we pretty much know that's kind of why they slope up, right? They slope up because price goes up, I want to sell more. Because I'm constrained by these other conditions, right? Okay. Have you guys done market equilibrium yet? Guys haven't talked about equilibrium yet? Okay, cool. Let's see. I don't know how I want to do this. I think I want to draw. So I think I'm going to change this thing. Ah!
So cold.
It's cold. I'm sweating, but I'm standing up here.
So freezing every
You're freezing?
week, and I bring a jacket, and I'm still cold.
That's tough. Ah, there it is. There's my button. No, but I have to shut the screen off, don't I? Where's my mute? Mute video. There we go. Okay.
Yeah, there are students a lot closer than what they normally are. They're normally like back here.
Really?
Yeah.
Usually right here.
Why it's like shut in the corner? Whatever. Okay. Well, see? Oh, that's good. These nice big letters. See them? Comically huge, size of my head. There we go. Oh man, am I going to be forced to use KU colors? Please no. Ha, I'm not. I'm good.
Long shot.
Oh wait, I am. Ha, wait, I got black. All right. So you guys have done supply curve stuff, right? Or no? You haven't, or you have? You haven't. Okay, that's good. Okay, so we'll start with supply curve stuff. Excuse me. So the law of demand says that if the price of a good increases, then we want to buy less, right? Supply curve is the other way around, right? The price of the good increases, we want to sell more, right? That makes sense, right? Especially since we're kind of constraining everything, right, to a certain geographic area or whatever, right? Because I mean, you could say, if we're talking about two different geographic areas, you could say, oh, well, if the price goes up here, I wouldn't want to sell more because tomorrow somewhere else I could get a better price somewhere else. Okay, fine, but I mean, this is just lines on a board, okay? Like I can only say so much, right? So within a given, time and all that stuff. I don't know why. I mean, I don't need to belabor this, do I? Makes sense, right? Okay, good. I'm glad we're on the same page. If this is confusing, let me know. But I'm just trying to say, like, price, quantity. Okay. Well, seriously though, if it's not clear, let me know. Okay, thank you. That wasn't raising your hand.
No.
Okay. Yeah.
Popping my.
It looked more like a stretch, so I'm good. Okay. So once we put these two things together, supply and demand, then we can start talking about something called an equilibrium, right? So do you see anywhere on here that looks like something could be called an equilibrium? What do you think? Yeah, like maybe right here?
Yeah.
In this general region, right? Not so much here or here, but here, right? Okay. So in that one spot, whoa, there we go. Picking up the red. Not mess at all. All right. Just seem to keep colors together like that. All right. So with this equilibrium price here, right, we're all sort of happy, right? The people that are selling it, they're getting as much as they can for that product, right? Because if they raise their price, right, they're going to sell a lot less, right? Are you okay? Do you need a physician?
It's so cold. Like, it just should be so hard.
Okay. And this is the equilibrium quantity, right? So what's unique about this spot right here on the graph is that nobody wants to change anything, right? The price doesn't want to shift and the quantity doesn't want to shift around, right? But let's think about how that might happen, right? So if the price is up here, right, then the people who are buying, right, people represented by this demand curve, they only want to buy this much, right? But the problem is the sellers are only willing, right, at this point, right, at that price, they're willing to produce and sell this much, right? So I guess I'm going to use a golf club. Is that how he uses it? Or does he usually break the head off first? Just kidding. You see what I'm saying? If the price is clear up here, we got a problem, right? The people on the green line aren't happy, right? The price is so high, they barely want anything, right? And the people on the black line are super happy, and they're like, why aren't people buying my stuff, right? I got all this stuff, it's just sitting around, right? It's not going to work. Same thing down here, right? Price is really low, then the people represented by the black line, they don't want to make anything at that price. And who can blame them? Right? Price is too low. But the people over here on this green line, they're thinking, man, this is cheap. Where's all the stuff I want? Right? So if the price is low like this, all these people start yelping for more stuff, and these people start listening, right? And so what happens to the price? Right? Up to here. Right, hold it. If the price is up high like this, nobody wants hardly any of it. And so a bunch of people on this side stop selling it, right? And they reduce how much they sell and the price goes down. right? As the price falls, people represented by the green line decide they want more of it, right? So does that make sense why we're at that spot? Besides me just drawing lines on a page, right, or on the board? So up here, would you say we have a shortage or a surplus if the price is up here?
Surplus.
Surplus, right? We got people producing this much and only wanting, you know, a lot less, right? Things. And if we're down here, do we have a shortage or a surplus? Shortage, right? So we got a whole bunch of people down here or up here on this green line that want to buy a ton, and nobody's producing hardly any of it, right? That make sense? Everybody got that on the computer? I hope this isn't threatening. Urgh. Oh, the wonderful people on the internet. So nice when Cola accommodates. I wouldn't. No, show up. Just kidding. So the thing about this spot right here, right, another way to sort of frame this is to say that when we're at this equilibrium, there aren't any wealth creating transactions that aren't going to go through, right? All the transactions that make sense so that the people on the demand side get what they want and the people on the supply side get what they want, all those transactions are happening, right? If we're down here in a shortage, then there's some people, or the people represented by the demand curve, want to buy stuff that isn't being produced for them, right? If we're down here. If we're up here, we got a surplus, right? People are producing things that nobody wants, right? At that price. So this is kind of a really important way for us to sort of have the world working, right? We kind of want things to be as close to that equilibrium as possible, right? But of course, things are always changing, right? You know, these demand curves, like we saw, right? The weather's always changing, and advertising stuff is always changing, right? So the demand curves are always shifting around, right? Changing things, right? We can talk about supply shifters too, right? Changes in the way businesses work, right? Vertical integration, bigger factories, right? Those are going to shift that supply curve around. We'll talk about that. Okay, so now kind of a fun little thing on the thing. I'll go this route. $15 right? Give me 15 minutes and we'll do the second, or the other two chapters on the last half. Hey, time flies when you're having fun, right? Hour 15 minutes already? Ooh, crazy. Okay. What? I'm serious.
What?
Say what?
Sounded like people I left room.
I don't speak Japanese.
That's fine.
Okay. You didn't think I was going to know what he meant, did you? What?
I'm lost.
You're lost, and I'm lost too. I'm just kind of messing around. I need more caffeine.
Same. I'm so tired.
Yeah? Well, hey, at least you got food to eat late, right? Portable generator market. Okay, so remember, I don't know, an hour and a half ago, we were talking about portable generators, right? Okay? And so we said, you know, as we get closer and closer to 2000, right, everybody gets more and more scared about what's going to happen in the year 2000. And so, you know, in 1998, we start doing all this vertical integration. We start building out all these factories, right, and getting prepared, right? Sell out tons and tons of generators, right? Because the whole world is going to collapse, right? And Jacob has 4,000 pounds of dried food that he bought at Costco for $200, and everybody else is going to want to go to Jacob's house, but I live closer, so you all die first. Right, Jacob?
Oh, yeah.
So then something happens in 1999. We get a demand shift, right? We get a shift to the right. So now, at the same price, everybody wants a lot more, right? Or at the same quantity, everybody's willing to pay a higher price, right? Those are kind of the two ways of saying the same thing when we're talking about a demand shift, right? At the same quantity, everybody's willing to pay more, or at the same price, we want to buy more, right? So Y2K is coming up. I'm buying a second generator just in case I'm having the first one, right? In case they put some kind of, you know, secret shut-off switch. It's electronic, right? Or something. Excuse me. Okay. So then we also have, at the same time, we have a supply shift, right? Supply, the supply side of the industry is saying, wait a second. We need to take advantage of this increase in demand that's going to happen, right? So we need to tool up and get ready, right? We need to, in other words, reduce the cost of our products, right? Does that make sense? I need to go back over. I need to go back to my supply curve for a second here. Because that, I did not adequately prepare you for that. So if we get a supply shift over here, right? What happened? Right? We went from here to here. Right? This is our new equilibrium, right? I'll use orange for this one. So now we've got a new Q star, second one, and we got a new P star, right?
Would the amount of supplies go down for the price?
Well, so let's slow down real quick. Maybe I can answer that while we talk for the next 45 seconds, okay? Okay. So this supply curve shift represents a reduction in the opportunity cost of production, right? We made a bigger factory, right? That's more efficient, right? We vertically integrated, we bought all our suppliers out, right? So now everything's, you know, faster and more efficient, right? And so what that means is now at a given price, instead of being willing to produce and sell this much, now we're willing to sell all the way over here this much. Right? Because our costs are lower. Does that make sense? Yes.
I mean, can you also look at more from like a strictly like a scarcity thing? Like you have more, so there's less demand, like you increase production.
Right, but the reason you have more is because the supply curve shifted. Right? I can produce
So
more.
doesn't that just represent an increase of supply? The supply curve.
So the supply curve.
An actual physical supply.
So if we were teaching this like not business econ, right? We would have another graph over here, that represented the firm's cost.
Right.
And one of those would look kind of like this, like a J.
Yeah.
And it would be the marginal cost curve, right? That's what that is.
Okay.
Supply curve is just the marginal cost curve. Okay? When your marginal cost curve goes like this, right? That's a reduction in your cost. Same thing.
So it's not like an embodiment of the supply.
No, supply curve is an embodiment of the marginal cost curve.
Okay.
Right? Supply curve is the industry level marginal cost curve. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Right? So this is nothing but the opportunity cost of producing, right? If we got more efficient, then I can do more, right? With the same amount of inputs, right? Does that make sense? Each quantity that I produce is cheaper, right? I'm better at it now. Does that make sense? We like that? So now I think everybody online, you okay with that? This is me looking at you, just so you know. I don't know if it appears as though I'm looking at you or not, but. Technology. Don't understand it. So here we go. We have a representation of what happened in this market over time, right? Here we are in 1998. Wow, y'all can't see that if you're online, can you? That sucks. Well, you know what? I'm just going to draw it. Because I basically already drew it. Y'all can see that one, right? A little better? Yes, no? Good deal. I think 3 of you were saying this, so I'm good. Okay, so basically, this is us in, let me bring my hat. So here we are, trucking along through the 90s, right? Very high crime, highest murder rates ever, right? Pokemon becomes a thing, right? Ninja Turtles sort of fade, right? It's the 90s. All of you decided to grace the world with your presence, right? And in the world of generators, things are going pretty good, right? We're in an equilibrium. And then somebody decided to tell somebody that something bad was going to happen when all the numbers change, and everybody freaked out about Y2K, right? So we got a new one of these. Right? And as a result, what did the industry do? So let me label this. Can I have another hand? Okay. 90, this is 98, and just to drive home the point about how scary Y2K is, I'm just going to put the 98. Terrifying. So the industry anticipated this, right? They anticipated this shift of the demand curve, right? So what did they do? They invested, right? They lowered their cost of production, right? They shifted their, help me. Each firm shifted their marginal cost curves. There we go. Too much Mountain Dew. And they shifted those supply curve for the whole industry over here, right? So now, in 1999, dun, 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 we find ourselves over here, right? Prices are a little bit higher maybe, right? But we definitely have a larger quantity being sold, right? In fact, that's really the main thing to happen, right? So the whole industry anticipated this potential price shift, and they all responded by increasing supply, right? And those two things worked together, this and this, to both increase quantity, but they sort of offset each other on the price effects, right? The demand shift would have increased prices, but the supply curve shift pushed them down, right? But both of them together made this massive increase in the quantity for 1999, right? So here's Q99. Way out here, right? That's our equilibrium for that specific year in the US in the market for generators, right? So then what happens in the year 2000? 2000s, 210s. What happened?
Demand shrinks back down.
Your VCR turned to 0 and nothing happened, right? You banged on pots and you went to bed at 10 p.m. as your mom told you to. Just like I did. Just kidding. No, I was forcing it. So now what happens in the industry? Now things are looking a little slimy, right? Because now we're on this supply curve still, right? But all of a sudden, you know, prepper Jacob decided that his 2,000 pounds of dried potatoes ain't so great anymore, right? And the 47 generators he bought for $100 a piece, it's up to sell them now in his front yard, right? So what happens to that, what happens to that demand curve? Right back where it was, right? So now we're here in our double aught, right? Now we've got lower prices, and okay, maybe a little bit more quantity, right? Maybe we're still selling a little bit, you know, because somebody didn't get the message, maybe like in Appalachia or something, right? They didn't get the message that, you know, it's not the year yet or whatever. But man, that's a lower price, right? Price is way low. Now it's like, heck, I should have waited, right? I should have bought mine in 98 or 99. I should have waited till after the disaster that didn't happen and bought mine, right? That's probably what a lot of people are thinking. Yeah, guess it wasn't a big deal. I guess I'll go buy one now since they're like 12 bucks instead of 80, right? Does this make sense? Is it kind of neat how you can sort of tell the story with the graph? Don't lie. Just kidding. I think it's neat. What the heck? I don't understand how this works. There we go. Okay. Give me 5 minutes. Okay. So, with our there we go. That was my Medea impression. So, over the past decade, the price of computers has fallen while the quantity has risen. Make any sense to anybody? Jacob, don't nod like you haven't had economics before. Over the past decade, the price of computers has fallen while the quantity has risen. How'd that work? You think we can tell a similar kind of story with our wonderful lines on the page? Man, y'all can't see that either, can you? Dadgum. Why does it do that? Ah! Well, pretty basic story, right? Supply curve shift. Supply curve shifted to the right a lot, right? And, you know, I don't really buy that we had a stable demand curve. I think that makes no sense at all. Because I think if you asked me in 2004 if I wanted one of these, I would have told you to get on my face because they're expensive, right? I didn't want it. I had a BlackBerry in like, what, 2010, 12, like that, 2011, 12. Yeah. Imagine that.
Those are the best ones, they're the best games.
Yeah, they have those tiny little keys on them too. Anyway. Basically, all we're thinking about in this case is just a giant supply curve shift, right? We talked about, the cost of computing has gone down, right? Like this thing has, I don't know, 400 times it's 400 times faster than the computer that sent the shuttle to the moon or whatever, or something like that, right? I mean, there's all these crazy numbers, right? I mean, this is like 128 gigs, right? You used to have something, you have to have something the size of a car to have that much information, right? So that's why quantity shifted to the right and the price fell, right? Because we had a rightward shift in the supply curve. Makes sense, right? Okay. When we come back, we'll talk about commercial paper, just to tease that and make sure everybody stays. Very excited about commercial paper. And I'll see you in, what's the usual break?